started. Okay, so today what we're going to cover is 4.3. 4.3 is going to be definition, measurement, and functions of money. All right. Now, you guys can see the different quantities of bills. Some of these bills are no longer in circulation, right? Like the $100,000 bill with the Wilson on it, or $1,000 bill with Cleveland on it. Both those bills are no longer being used, right? So, but they were at some point being used, right? Now, why do we use money, right? So let's think about that. Like, why is money used? Like, what is it used for? And what would we do if we didn't have money, right? If we didn't have money, goods and services would be traded directly, right? So, like, for example, if like I was to raise chickens, I would take my chickens, right, and take them to go trade them for groceries every week, right? Or I'd trade them to a cow farmer, right, and get a cow in exchange for a set number of chickens, right? And that's called the barter system, right? Or I would take, I would tutor someone, right, in economics, and then in exchange for that, they would give me something for that, right? So, like, let's say a doctor or something, like I, get sick or something, doctor, I need to see a doctor. Well, they would trade me that that service of them seeing me, right, as a patient, for some chickens, right? It's like, or no, I'm sorry, for me tutoring them, right? So, now there's a few problems with the barter system, right? And it was used before, before we got the idea of money, right? So, one, before trade can occur, each trader had to have something the other one wanted. This is called the double coincidence of wants. Now, think about that. If I needed to see a doctor and then I was a chicken farmer, right? Well, the doctor that I need to see doesn't like chicken, right? Or doesn't want chickens, right? So he's not going to see me. Well, that, is kind of a bad situation for me because I need to see the doctor and I have chickens, right? So I need to find something that the doctor wants. So now I got to take my chickens, go find somebody or find out what the doctor wants, trade my chickens for whatever that is, and then exchange that good for the service, right, of him seeing me. Other things is, let's say he's like, you know what, if the service isn't worth a whole chicken, right? Like, let's say someone comes and they're going to mow my lawn. Again, I'm a chicken farmer, right? And I say, and it takes them, like 5 minutes to mow my lawn. Well, that's like worth half a chicken, I guess, right? So, like, I'm not going to take a chicken, cut it in half, and give it to him, right? Like, I have to give him the whole chicken. So, and like what's the exchange rate for different goods, right? So, like, if I'm going to take my chickens and exchange it for a cow, right? Well, what if, like, half of a cow is worth 100 chickens, right? So, like, no one's going to give me half a cow, right? So it's just not a really good system, and a lot of people lose out because of that, right? So we come up with this idea of money, right? And money is accepted as a payment for goods and services, right? Now, pretty important to understand here the difference between money and wealth, right? Or income, right? So let's just go over those two things, or those three things. So money is like the actual paper money and coin money that you guys see, right? The dollar bill. Wealth is like all of your money that you have, like, accumulated, right? And there's going to be different types of, like, money, right? And we'll see that here in a second. But, like, if you were to take all your assets, like everything that you own, right? Like your Xbox, your clothes, your car, and all those things, and that's how much wealth you have, right? Because you could turn around and sell those things, of course, right? And then your income is, a lot of you guys are on minimum wage, right? Or some of you guys make a little bit more than minimum wage, right? And that's your income, as to what you're paid either hourly, or what your salary is for the year, or for the month, or however it's noted for you, right? Now, so there are two types of money, right? The two types of money is commodity money and fiat money. So commodity money is something that performs the function of money and has an intrinsic value, right? So, like, you can use it as money, but then you can also use it as something else, right? So like jewelry, right? Jewelry like gold, silver, that's something that you can wear and look beautiful in, right? But then you can also take that gold necklace, take it to take it, and melt down the gold and sell that, right? Cigarettes, right? In prison, a lot of cigarettes are traded and used as money, right? And so you could trade someone a cigarette, right? And that cigarettes, it could also be smoked, right? So like it's used as money, but also used as to smoke, right, or whatever. And then now the other, so that's commodity money, right? Stuff that you can use for other things. Okay. Now the other type of money is fiat money, and fiat money is something that serves as money but has no other value or use, right? So like a dollar bill, the peso, right? The dollar, the paper peso, or the coin peso, or the or coins, right? The uh, pennies, nickels, and dimes, or whatever. Those all only serve the purpose of money, right? Like you cannot go use a coin for something else, right? Now, I mean, or a dollar bill, right? Not like you could gold, silver, or cigarettes, right? So uh, think of that, right? Like digital currency, so iTunes, gift cards, stuff like that. All of those things would be considered fiat money, right? So, any questions on commodity money or fiat money? Okay. Now, so we use money for three reasons, right? One is it's a medium of exchange, right? And so money can easily be used to buy goods and services, and there's no complications of the barter system. So you can take, like, if I need to go to the doctor, it's $100 to see the doctor. Boom, $100. Here's a $100 bill, and I can see the doctor, right? Now it's a unit of account, right? So measured value. So money measures the value of all goods and services. Money acts as a measurement of value. So again, so like I can take that medium exchange, right? And I know that $100 is one doctor visit, right? Or I know that number one at Whataburger is $5 and a quarter, or whatever the price is, right? I know that that's a unit of exchange, right? I know that if I go to McDonald's, I could take $1 and buy $1 cheeseburger, right? So that's a unit of exchange. I'm sorry, unit of account. Now, also the other thing that's good that is not in commodity money is like if we go back to my example of being a chicken farmer, right? Is that chickens eventually are going to die, right? So like I would lose my money essentially, or I'd lose my commodity, right? The chicken, because it's dead. I'd lose that. But with money, right? One of the functions of money is that it stores value. So I could take that $100 and I can put it in my pocket, or it's probably more smart to put it in the bank, right? But take that $100 and I can use it later, right? I don't have to use it like right now, right? A chicken, on the other hand, if I were to feather it and whatever, take off all its whatever the skin, and then it's ready. I've only got the shelf life of a dead chicken, right? To change that or exchange that with somebody else for something that they need. And I need that coincidence, the double coincidence of wants to line up so that I can see that, right? All right. So if we look here, which of the following is not a function of fiat money, right? Let's go ahead and just look at that question for a second. Does anybody not understand question 49? Okay, I'll take your guys' no response as that you guys are good with that question. Let's go ahead and move on to slide 11. All right, so now what backs the money supply? So a while back, over a century ago, money was actually backed by gold, right? And then now it is no longer backed by gold, and that's so that you can manipulate the dollar and the value of the dollars to meet with inflation, right? And if you were to back it by gold, you're only set by the amount of gold that's in your reserve, right? So what money comes from, and this is kind of crazy, is that there's a collective belief that it's valuable, right? Like everybody that pulls out a dollar knows that what the value of a dollar is, right? And so since we all believe in that, right, that system holds true. Just like Bitcoin, right? Everybody that cryptocurrency, right? Everybody believes in it. So because they all believe in it, it holds a value, right? Whatever the I'm not really familiar with Bitcoin, but like whatever one Bitcoin is, right? It holds whatever value Bitcoin holds. So because of that, people believe in it, so there's value to it, right? So what makes money effective is that it's generally accepted. Buyers and sellers have confidence that it is legal tender, right? It is scarce, right? There's only so many dollar bills or money in our economy, right? And then it is portable and dividable, and that's pretty important, right? So that you can take it with you anywhere, right? And it's easy to put in your wallet or your purse, right? And it's easy to divide up, right? So like a dollar, you can divide up 100 ways, right? Like with 100 pennies, but you can divide it by quarters, you can divide it by dimes, whatever. And same with $5, 10, 20, 50, and then 100, right? So all those values are easily dividable, right? Now, the purchasing power. Now, this is pretty important to understand. This purchasing power is that the purchasing power of money is the amount of goods and services a unit of money can buy. So your purchasing power is how much your dollar bill can buy, right? So the purchasing power of a dollar is anything on the dollar menu, right? And so what's going to happen when inflation occurs? What's going to happen to your purchasing power? Think about that for a second. If price levels go up, what's going to happen to your purchasing power? Well, if price levels go up, then your purchasing power is going to decrease because you're not going to be able to buy as much, right? So now hyperinflation, right? The rapid increase of inflation is going to decrease the acceptability of, or is going to decrease considerably your purchasing power. Okay. All right. Now we need to classify money. Now there's more classifications of money, right? But we're only going to look at M1 and M2 of money, right? So liquidity is the ease of which assets can be assessed and used as a medium of exchange, right? So M1 is the purest form of money, right? The most liquid it could be, okay? And so that's going to be currency in circulation. That's going to be checkable deposits, so your checking accounts, right? And that's going to be traveler's checks, right? So traveler's checks is you go to the bank, you get a traveler's check, and it's like you can go to a foreign country or a different country and you can use that. It's like if you lose a traveler's check, you can call the bank and they can cancel the traveler's check. So it's a little bit safer than carrying actual cash. But it's not very common to use traveler's checks now just because of the ease of debit cards and stuff like that. So but again, M1 is the highest liquidity. Okay, it's the most pure liquid form of money. M2 takes, and so this is how quickly you can liquidate your assets, right? Like how quick you can. So think about that. Like you see that in movies quite a bit when they say liquidate your assets, or that's what we're talking about here, right? Is the fluidity of the money, right? Like how quickly we can get to it and access it and use it. So M2 is going to be near money. Okay. So near money is going to be M1 plus the following, right? So savings deposits, right? That's money market accounts. So if you open up a money market account, it sits in a money market. Like it cannot just go and like withdraw from your money market account. Like it has to sit there for a set number of time. So it is not very liquid, right? And then time deposits like CDs, certificates of deposit, right? So that again, it has to mature, right? It has to go from when you buy it to the end date, and at the end date, then you can cash it in. So again, it's not very liquid because you cannot take it immediately and take it to the bank and cash it, right? You have to wait until the time is expired. And then money market funds. Again, those are, not very long investments, or not very long holding periods, but they do have holding periods where they hold your money for a set number of days. I think money market accounts are like 6 weeks or something like that, and then stuff like that. So now they're going to offer more interest than, let's say, the M1, like your checking account. But it just takes a little bit more time to access that money. So M1 and M2 often do not have interest, or very little interest attached to it, but it's an opportunity cost. So the opportunity cost of holding liquid is the interest you could be earning, right? So like there's other options, like you can take M1 or M2 money and you can put that in a let's say like a mutual fund, or like the stock market or something like that, right? And so, but that is going to hold your money considerably longer than M1 or M2, if that makes sense to you guys. If not, just in the comments, ask a question, right? All right, so there's of course some videos and stuff that you guys can watch those on your own. Probably a good idea to, especially if you're taking the AP tests, to make sure that you watch those. All right. What we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and jump to 4.4, and that is banking. Let me just kind of organize this stuff real quick. Any questions that you guys might have? I know some of you guys popped in here. We're moving on to, we just covered 4.3. We're moving on to 4.4. So if you guys want to open those up real quick, probably keep you guys for another. We'll probably just get through this, and then we'll move on to the next thing. Now, this one is a little bit more difficult because there is a concept in this one that's a little tricky, right? Even for me, sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't like doing these, but they're not that bad, right? We can figure it out. I think, Jonah, if you remember, this is pretty much the what was that? What is it in micro? It is the prisoner's dilemma. What is that called? Not the prisoner's dilemma. Whatever, that matrix that you have to had to do, that I really just don't like doing. I forget what it's called. Game theory. Yes, thank you. Game theory. So this is like game theory, but my game theory for macro, Jonah. And Ethan, you took micro last year with me too. All right. So give you guys a second to open that up. I just need to get a glass of water real quick. All right. Okay, so let's go ahead and get through 4.4. Okay, so so fractional reserve banking. All right, now you guys remember the multiplier effect, right? The spending multiplier, the taxing multiplier. Well, there's a banking multiplier, right? The money multiplier, and that's how that works. Is let's go through this, right? Like you're gonna go to the bank, right? and you're going to deposit your check, right? Let's say your check is $100, right? So you take your money to Wells Fargo, you put it in Wells Fargo. Well, what's Wells Fargo going to do with that money? Well, they're required to hold a set amount of that money in the vault, right? Um, and the rest of it, of course, they're going to lend it out, right? They're going to lend it out with interest, and they're going to go and invest it, and they're going to do other things with your money to try to generate more money for the bank, right? And so, um, so um, let's say that they have to hold 10% of your um, and they're required to hold the required reserve, right, is 10% of your deposit, right? So you deposit $100, they have to take $10 of that deposit and they have to put it into their reserves, right? And so they can now take $90 and they can go and lend that $90 to somebody else. And let's say I need to get a new phone or something like that, or I don't know, something that costs $90, not a phone, whatever. So I go to Wells Fargo and I say, hey, I need a $90 loan. So they lend me $90. I take that money, that $90, and I'm going to put it in an account at Chase, right? And so Chase is going to take the $90. I'm going to put $9 in the vault, right? And they're going to take the other $81 and they're going to lend it out to somebody else, right? They're going to come and get that $90 and then they're going to deposit that money in their bank, right? And then they're going to put 10% of that value back into the vault, right? And so that's what's required reserves, right? And then we'll look at the reserve ratio here shortly. But then there's also excess reserves, right? So excess reserves is money that they have on hand that's not in the vault. Well, it's in the vault, right? But it's not that it has to stay there. They cannot touch the required reserves, right? That has to stay in the bank. Or they have to get it from another bank to like if I go in and withdraw all my money from the bank and I have more money in the bank than they have on hand, then they need to go get that money from some other bank to make that happen. But they need to have, at the end of the day, they need to have that reserve requirement, right? And so, and that's just lending through banks and stuff like that. And then the Federal Reserve, but we'll get through that a little bit later, right? So excess reserves is what they have in reserves, but they can lend out, right? So my example was that you go in, you deposit 100 into the bank, right? Jonah has a job at, or Alyssa works at Sonic, right? She goes and she has a job. She gets her check. It's $100. She takes that $100 to Wells Fargo. She deposits the $100, right? I go in and they take $10 of that, and then they have of excess reserves. They have $90, right? And so now I take that. I go to Wells Fargo. I take out the loan, right? And then I go and buy something, right? And whoever I buy from, they're going to take that $90. They're going to put it in their bank, right? Ethan, I buy, a bike from Ethan, right? So they're going to take that $90. They put it in Chase, and then Chase now has $81 in excess reserves that they can lend out with the $9 in the reserved requirement, right? But those are still both in the vault. Yes. Okay. And then so that's going to keep happening over and over and over and over again. And think about that. That's what's happening there, is that money is multiplying, right? It's becoming a larger and larger and larger, the amount. And there was only $100 in circulation from that example, right? So like Alyssa put in the $100, and then from the $100 I took out a $90 loan, so that's 190. Then Ethan deposits that. Someone comes in, they take out another an $81 loan. That's going to be what 74 50 whatever, $74, and then on down the line, right? And so that creates money. So we have what's called a money multiplier here for banking as well. And what that equation is 1 over the reserved requirement ratio. Okay. And so, and they'll give you, like on the test, they'll give you what the reserved requirement ratio is, right? Like, and I think right now in the United States, it's 10%. They, just because of everything that's going on, they actually were thinking about lowering the reserve requirement to allow banks to lend out more money, right? And so, well, here we'll see here how the reserve requirement, because the banks can manipulate, or the Federal Reserve manipulates, or is in charge of the reserve requirement. Okay. All right. Now we're going to look at something called balance sheets, right? Now, balance sheets, we need to have a few definitions before we get to what a balance sheet is. Okay. So you have demand deposits, and that's money deposited into commercial banks in a checking account. Okay. You have the reserved requirements, or the required required reserves, and that's the percentage the bank must hold by law. Then you have excess reserves, and that's the money that the banks can lend out. And then you have a balance sheet, which is a record of the bank's assets, the liabilities, and the net worth. So, are demand deposits in a bank or an asset or a liability? Well, as you guys can see, right, it's a liability for the bank and an asset for the depositor, right? All right, so if we move on to slide 9, are there any questions so far? I kind of went a little fast there. No? Okay. All right, so bank balance sheet. So let's look here. Now, I want you guys to notice a few things, right? Is that it's a balance sheet. So your liabilities need to balance your assets, right? And at the end of the day, these two things need to be equal. So you can move stuff from your liabilities to your assets. You can move stuff from your assets to your liabilities, and so forth. But because of that, and if someone comes in and takes out money, or someone comes in and takes out a loan, those things need to shift on both sides of the equation so that they equal at the end, right? So now you can see here in the assets, right? You're going to see loan, reserves, treasury, T-bonds. And so we'll look at T-bonds a little bit later, but treasury bonds, but that's just another way the Federal Reserve can manipulate the economy, right? And then on the liabilities is demand deposits, owner equity. And so you can see the assets equals 10,000, while the while the liabilities equal 10,000 as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at slide 11. Okay, so here if Bob, okay, so we're just getting right into this. Okay, so Bob deposits $1,000 into the bank, right? And so what is the required reserve ratio? So how do we determine that? So let's see, the reserve requirement is 2,000. We can see that there. And we can see that 2,000, we have to see how much. So 2 times 2. Okay, so we're looking at just the asset side, right? So you're just going to add the required reserve. You're going to have the excess reserve. You're going to add the treasury bond, and you're going to add the loans, right? And so that's all of the assets. And then you're going to see how much the reserve requirement is, or what percentage the reserve requirement is of those values, right? So here, it should be 20,000, right? Plus so it's 25,000, right? And so 2,000 of 25,000, why is that? No, it's, I'm sorry. You're going to add the treasury bonds and the loans, which gives you 20,000, not the reserves. You don't add the reserves. Just 5,000 and 15,000. And then so your required reserves from that is 2,000, is 10%. Or you can look over at the demand deposits, right? And take from the demand deposit, what the percentage of your reserve is from the demand deposit. And that's going to give you 10%, okay? Go ahead and skip number 2 because we haven't covered money supply, right? Or I guess you can kind of look at it, right? So will M1, the money supply, initially increase, decrease, or stay the same? It'll stay the same. It's going, Bob takes that $1,000 and puts it in the bank. Okay. So how much is the reserved, required reserved? So what you would do is what's 10% of the 1,000, and 10% of the 1,000 would be put into the reserves, right? And then the 900, the rest of that would be go into the excess reserves, right? And then so how much can the bank initially lend out? So the bank can initially lend out all of his excess reserves, so 3,900, right? And then the maximum change in money supply after the deposit. So again, what you would do is you would take the value that's put into the bank, right? And then use the multiplier. So the multiplier is 1/10, right? Because the multiplier, again, if we go back, we can see that the multiplier is 1 over the reserve ratio. So 1/10, 1/10 is 10, right? And so you subtract the reserve ratio. So 900, so 900 times 10 is going to be 9,000. And then that's going to be the change in the money supply after the deposit. Does that make sense at all to you guys? Are we kind of a little lost on that? How are we doing on that concept? I'm still lost. Okay, so what questions do you have, Danielle and Ethan? Don't worry, we're going to go over quite a few examples on this, right? It's just, it's going to take a lot of practice. And not sure how you got 4. Okay, so number 4, how much is in excess reserves? Okay, so look here at excess reserves. So when you, another example. Yeah, of course, we'll do another example. So when you go to the bank, right, and you deposit your money, a portion of that money has to go to the required reserves. The rest of it can be loaned out, right? But it's not going to be loaned out right away, right? It's going to go in the vault. And so it goes into excess reserves. And all of your excess reserves can be loaned out, right? All your required reserves have to stay in the bank. So Bob went in, and you can see at the top, right? Bob goes in, he deposits $1,000, right? Well, our reserve ratio is how much? It is 10%. So because it's 10%, we would take 10% of the $1,000 deposit from Bob, put that into the reserve account, and then the rest of it, right, would go into excess reserves. So 100 would go into reserve requirements of the 1,000, and the 900 would go into excess reserves, making it 3,900. So that's how I came up with the answer for number 4. Okay. Cool. All right. Slide 13. Okay. So slide 13. Now we're going to look at the other side, right, and see what kind of happens if someone comes out and withdraws. And don't worry, Daniela, there's a video that's attached to this, as well as there's like 100 other examples that we're going to go through this. It's maybe not today, but we'll go through them, right? All right. Okay. So let's look at slide 12. So if Bob withdraws 3,000 from the bank, right? What's going to happen to the supply of money? Well, nothing's going to happen to the supply of money, right? It's going to stay the same because it's still the same amount of money that's in currency. Now, how much is the required reserved? Well, since they don't have as much in the demand deposit, right? Because he's withdrawn 3,000 from it. Since the reserved ratio is 10%, then you could move money out of your required reserve, right? So let's see, demand deposits, if we change that to 17,000, how much needs to be in the required reserves. Again, if the demand deposit, Bob goes in, he withdraws 3,000, right? The demand deposit's going to drop to 17,000, right? Does everybody see that? And then from there, what's going to happen to reserve requirements? If it has to be reserve requirements have to be 10% of your demand deposits. Okay, your reserve requirements would then drop to 1,700. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, cool. And so, or one person said yes, so cool. All right. So again, we'll go over some more examples. So you don't like really get this. We'll do it over and over again. This is just the first time we're saying it, so just kind of going through it. Okay. And so let's go to the next question, which would be how much is in excess reserves. So he needs 3,000, right? To withdraw 3,000. So your demand deposit is going to top to 17,000. And so your excess reserves, you're going to take out the 3,000 from the excess reserves, and that's going to go to Bob, right? Because that's where his money's going to, right? He's taking it out of the bank. Now you have your required reserves, and your required reserves dropped by how much? They dropped by 300. So you're going to take that 300 and then you're going to move it over to your excess reserves. Okay. And then, you know what I'll do is the next time, just because we don't have I don't want to keep you guys that long, is I'll do this example, but I'll do it with my whiteboard. So that way you guys can have a better view of this, right? Of all this. Cause I'm just kind of like pointing to things and you guys are trying to follow along and stuff like that. So, Monday I'll do some more examples, and I'll do these examples, but I'll do them with a whiteboard so you guys can see more specifically. Okay. Now, the last question is assumed Bob buried the money. What is the maximum change in the money supply? Well, again, you can take the multiplier, which is 1 over 0.10. That's going to be 10. So he took out 3,000. You multiply 3,000 by 10. That's going to give you 30,000, and that decreases the money supply by money supply by 3,000. Does that? Hopefully that makes sense. Again, what we'll do is Monday we'll do an example. But what you could do until then is, if you got to go to slide 14, there's some bank balance sheet practice that you guys can do to kind of help you guys out. Slide 14 gives you a question, and then slide 15 gives you a what's it called, a FRQ that you guys can look at. So Monday we'll start with the example, and then we will do the FRQ for you guys on Monday. Are there any questions? If there's no questions, then yes, I'm going to upload this to YouTube. So for those that missed it, and then Monday we'll kind of go back to Monday next week, and then Wednesday next week for class. And I try to keep them about 45 minutes to an hour, because I know I was keeping them like way longer at the beginning of all this. So.